Okay, so good evening. I am Beth Reindl Madrigal, President of the League of Women Voters, Okaloosa Walton County. I'll serve as moderator of this forum. My timekeeper tonight is Mary Blackwell, former president and now secretary of our local league. I also wish to thank the current co-presidents of our Florida League, which is Cecile Schoon and Debbie Chandler, Florida's communications manager, Blake Summerlin, who's on with us tonight. Haley Richards, she's the president of the Scambia League, and they helped organize tonight's event. So the League of Women Voters is a trusted nonpartisan organization. While we never endorse a candidate or party, we are directly involved in shaping the important policy issues that keep our community state strong. As league members, we have opportunities to educate ourselves and others on local, state, and national issues. The league wants everyone to vote, so we actively encourage participation at the polls through voter registration and education efforts such as this forum and our online voters guide, vote411.org. In addition, many of our state and many local leagues have a speakers bureau which offers education to interested organizations on a wide range of topics. I encourage you to visit our website at lwvfl.org to learn more about our work. The league is happy to present this forum so voters in Congressional District 1 can learn more about their candidates. The forum is being recorded and will be available on the league's website tomorrow. It is also being presently live streamed on the League of Women Voters of Florida's Facebook page. We greatly appreciate the candidates' willingness to participate in this forum. All 10 candidates on the Republican primary ballot were invited to participate at the same time. These candidates are with us tonight. We have not heard are with us tonight. So we do have, I should get my list. We have Aaron Dimmick, we have Kevin Gaffney, we have Greg Merck, we have Michael Thomas, we have Jeff Macy, and we have Jeff Peacock. We have not heard from Jimmy Petronis. Well, Jimmy Petronis's office sent a message that he was tied up later today, I believe. Joel Redman was trying to make it. I'm not sure what happened with him. Gene Valentino had a conflicting event, and John Mills was going to come tonight, but he had a conflict at work. He had a work emergency. So the election date is Tuesday, January 28th. Early voting begins this week. Please check with your county supervisor of elections for details. Let's get started. Each candidate will give an opening statement of up to 2 minutes explaining their qualifications and interest in holding this office. Then we will follow by questions with each candidate having the opportunity to respond, each of 4 to respond for 1.5 minutes. We drew a name for the forum. We drew a name before the forum began to see which candidate will start first. We will rotate the order following the opening remarks. So we have Michael Thomas first. So you were the winner of the first one. And then after that, we're going to rotate 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 on down the line. So everyone will get a chance. Okay, so let's start with opening remarks. I believe Michael Thompson, you're first. Michael Dylan Thompson. You need to unmute yourself.
How about that? Still
There
not
we
up?
go.
Wonderful. You know, that always happens with Zoom calls, but
yeah.
Thank you so much for hosting this. I thought it was a great idea to have a digital event because there's a lot of informed voters who aren't so mobile and it's tough for them to get out of their houses. So hopefully they can, you know, try to meet us virtually. I finished my law school while COVID was going on, so I know firsthand how difficult it can be doing things through Zoom. But again, thanks for having it. My name is Michael Dylan Thompson. I am running for Congress here in my home district. I was born and raised in Pensacola, born in Sacred Heart Hospital, and until I was a proud graduate of Booker T. Washington High School. I am alumnus of the University of Alabama, and I hope nobody will hold that against me. I graduated there when I was 19 years old, and then I went off to Yale Law School, where I got my law degree when I was 23. I've been a practicing attorney for 4 years now. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is a young guy, and he's talking very fast, but I promise you, I'm the hardest working one out of everybody you'll hear from. I was the only one who got on the ballot thanks to voters who petitioned to put me on there instead of having to pay a filing fee. So we've hit the ground running. I've been doing my best to make my way around Escambia County, and I'm really excited to be able to fight for my hometown and home county over here. Also important to me is fighting this homeowners insurance crisis. I've gotten to talk to thousands of people across the district. They say their number one issue is that they can't afford their homeowners insurance. This has been caused by Florida politicians because it was a state issue. So now we need to send somebody up to the federal government to make sure that insurance companies treat Floridians fairly. I'm also trying to make it easier for
30
veterans.
seconds.
Thank you. I'm making it easier for veterans to access their benefits by virtue of making it shorter for them to hear back on their initial applications and appeals, and also making the applications process easier. I'd like to put in a Veterans Resource Center so they can access everything there at once. I'm also committed to fighting for getting the federal government out of education and making life easier for small businesses. Thank you guys so much again. My name is Michael Dillon Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Now we will have Jeff Macy.
Hi, I'm Jeff Macy. I lived my entire life in Okaloosa County, so District 1 lifelong. My family's been in the area absolutely forever, and I'm not a veteran. I'm a military brat, so that's my connection with the military. So what I bring to the table is I'm a software engineer, and I went to the opposing school in Alabama. I went to Auburn to get my degree. And I'm an expert in cybersecurity. I've been working in the field for about 25 years with all of the cyber attacks that have been happening, especially over the last year with China and Russia. I noticed that there wasn't adequate personnel with software and cybersecurity background in Washington. So my goal was to get into Washington and trying to help everything within our infrastructure, schools, hospitals, all of your smart devices, your phones, smart speakers, your Hue lights, your Ring doorbells, our power grids. They're all susceptible to attack. And we're seeing that
30
happening.
seconds.
And we're seeing that happening almost on a daily basis now. Like last week, the US Treasury was attacked by China, which I consider an act of war. During the investigation, they found several Russian apartments using AI to influence our election, which I also see that as an act of war. So I'm trying to help guide Congress kind of secure our borders and help us out in that.
Time.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Now we have Jeff Peacock.
Well, good evening. Thank you, ladies, for hosting us. I appreciate the League of Women Voters giving us this opportunity to speak to you. I'm a local guy. I actually grew up in Century up at the north end of Escambia County, and went off to, I'm a Florida state school guy, so I went off to Florida State. And then after graduating from Pensacola Junior College, so I started from Pensacola Junior College, went to Florida State, and then went on to the University of Chicago and eventually ended up at Harvard University. And I'm running for this because I'm not a career politician. I'm a teacher. I actually teach over at Navarre High School. I live in Pace and I teach at Navarre High School. And I offer a little different perspective than I think some of the career politicians that are running for a promotion in this race. You know, as I say, I grew up in Century, so I think a lot of people throughout this district feel like there's no representation. They have no one in Congress fighting for them. And I want to be the voice for those people who for too long have felt like they've been forgotten about. They've been ignored. You know, I want to want to basically work for the people that, are the working folks who, may not have the biggest lobbyists out there or may not have the most power, but they should have someone to speak for them. And that's what I want to do. I want to speak for the teachers, and I want to speak for the law enforcement and the plumbers and people like that. In terms of my platform, there's 3 areas I want to focus on. Number one, I'm the son. I think Mary just gave me the 30 seconds there. So I am the son of a World War II veteran, a Pearl Harbor survivor. So I want to fight on behalf of our veterans. I am also a teacher. So I want to fight to make sure that every child receives a quality education, regardless of where they come from. And I also, as a former small business owner, I want to make sure that economic opportunities exist out there for our entrepreneurs and also our business folks. So please visit jeffpeacock.com if you'd like to learn more.
Time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now Aaron Dimick.
Good evening, Beth. Thank you, Beth, as well, and Mary and Blake. And great to be with everyone this evening. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. My name is Aaron Dimick, and I'll start with my family first. My wife, Kim, and I met on a blind date in May of 1993, and a little over 3 years later, we actually got married after I graduated and became a commissioned naval officer out of the United States Naval Academy. We have 4 children, live here in Pensacola, have been Florida residents for well over 20 years. My mom and brother live here, my aunt and uncle and cousin, and we love calling Florida home. During that time that I spent in the military, a little over 20 years, I had the privilege of being able to fly missions, lead operational missions all around the globe. I also had the opportunity to command a unit, a Navy recruiting district, and as their chief executive officer, I was responsible for leading over 2,500 team members, sailors, and executed over a $5 million annual budget. And we became the #1 of 24 districts across the country. From there, it gave me an opportunity to work for 2 different secretaries of defense at the Pentagon, looking at leadership and character development and ethics across all of the Department of Defense, all the services. And we were actually charged with looking at internal corruption and being able to hold folks in leadership positions accountable. I used that skill set to start my own business, my consulting LLC. And I've
30
been doing that
seconds.
for several years now, and really appreciated that opportunity. And I did run against our former congressman this past summer, and on August 20th, there were 26,788 of you that gave me an endorsement through your vote, and I've been building on that energy ever since. So looking forward to the conversation, and thanks again, Beth.
Okay, so then we have Kevin Gaffney.
All right, I'm Kevin Gaffney, and I live at Freeport, Florida, over in Hammock Bay. So in Walton County, we had a great forum today, a lively forum, and I've been married for 36 years to my wonderful wife. I have 5 children and 4 grandchildren. My experience, like Jeff, I've been in teacher for over combined with adjunct and high school level for almost 20 years, and then with the federal government over 21 years. My federal government experience includes work with the criminal unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago, 11 years with the VA in the area of personnel law, and also about 3.5, 4 years with the CFTC in Washington, D.C., the Division of Enforcement. I'm running mainly similar to some of the other candidates, mainly for Veterans Care. I had a strong family history. My dad was Army Air Corps, grandfather World War I, and then uncles that served both in Vietnam and World War II as well. So I do have a care for, I just think they should have the best care possible in District 1, and I don't think we have that currently. And I also feel, as Michael does with the insurance crisis and economic crisis following some of these hurricanes, that the state officials that aren't here tonight, and Jimmy actually said that we're running a surplus.
30 seconds.
I think we're heading for a deficit of about 6.4 billion. So we need to be focused on the first district a little better than in the past, and that's my agenda in part going forward.
Thank you all. We had Greg was going to be here. I don't see him, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the first question. which will start with Kevin and then
Right.
it's Greg. I'm going to take him off, then Aaron. Then we'll add Jeff on that one. We'll kind of go down. I think given, actually, I'm going to change this up a little bit since there's only 5 of you. If, as long as we can
I
move
have
it
one
through-
request.
Yes, sir.
Can you say Macy or Peacock, please?
I'm so sorry. First.
Well, we have 2 Jeffs, that's why.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I
I'm
don't know,
sorry.
Jeff, it might be interesting if we switched up our answers just
Yeah,
to see what we
well,
come up with.
I'm about to take care of all this for you guys. What I would like to do is go ahead and have, since we only have 5 of you, is go ahead and have all you answer it, limited time. I got a minute and a half, so we cut it from 2 minutes to a minute and a half, rather than, try to figure out who to swap up in which category. So the first question is, what role do you think that the Department of Education should play in public school education? Please state your reason for your position, and that would be Kevin Gaffney.
All right, so I've been, but for 3 semesters at Northwest, mainly in private education. So with the Doge Commission, I did look up as to how much the billions that is being spent at the Department of Education. It's quite high. I think that education is best handled at the local, as closest to the people level. And so I would propose and support the elimination of the Department of Education. I'm more for chartered schools. I'm more for private schools as well. I do think we're failing at the national level with some of the ideology that's coming out of the Department of Education. So that would be my position on that.
Okay, so then we will go to Michael Thompson.
I almost made the microphone mistake again. Kevin, I think you knocked it out of the park. Defunding the Department of Education frees up a ton of wasted bureaucrat money that we could be funneling directly to local school districts. I think education is best handled at home through parents and teachers. It needs to be a collaborative effort that has nothing to do with the federal government setting policy. One mistake we have there is if we put somebody in power like the Department of Education, if we lose the presidency and then woke ideology comes in, all of a sudden you have your kids learning things at school that parents are trying their best to stop. Getting rid of the Department of Education handles both of those goals at the same time.
Okay, then we will go to Jeff Macy.
I'm mostly in agreement, except for the total elimination, because I think there can be a purpose for the federal Department of Education to essentially be a service to collect all the stats from the state departments of education so that it can be analyzed, but it should not have any power to do anything that it's doing right now. So I would completely gut it and repurpose it so that we can get some good statistics provided through the different states.
Thank you. So Jeff Peacock is next.
Thank you. So I actually had this question, this very basic question. What does the Department of Education do? So I actually did a search to see what the Department of Education does. So I found out that they have a $238 billion budget in 2024, which blew me away. And then I looked to see what they do. So some of the items they do is they administer the Pell Grant program. They collect statistics on educational issues from local authorities, and they promote public education. $238 billion to do those things. I'm sorry, I just don't see the value in that. So I would eliminate the Department of Education for 2 reasons. Number one, it's not worth the money we're spending. We're certainly not getting our value for the money that we're spending. And number two, like the other fellows here, I think that school choices and school decisions should be made at the local level, not at the federal level. So for those 2 reasons, one, it's just a waste of taxpayer money, but 2, I think we should be making education decisions locally rather than at the federal level.
30 seconds.
Okay, and then we have Aaron Dimmick.
Yeah, so my only ad here, do away with it. let the local leaders, teachers, families, and administrators be responsible for their own locations. They know what their students and families need best. And yes, I would agree with the headway that Florida has made actually under Governor DeSantis for school choice, creating and opening up the marketplace so that the students have to actually go after the quality teachers, the quality programs, and then you create that market within which folks shuffle around and they improve. It forces improvement in the education system. So that starts with doing away with the department as a whole.
Okay, so next question, we have what reductions, if any, to social services would you support as resources are reviewed by the new Department of Government Efficiency? You already mentioned Doge. And Michael Thompson, you will start first.
I think the problem most Americans have is there is no accountability and we don't really trust where all this money is going. I think we need to first eliminate inefficiencies and do full audits on these programs. I mean, all of our social programs to make sure that it's going to where we say it's going to go. But then the cuts need to focus on waste, and we need to make sure that our entitlement programs are reformed properly to ensure that things like Social Security are going to be available for later generations. Folks my age look to each other and say, what are we going to do? You know, where's all this Social Security money going? We know it's not going to be there for us in 40 years, 50 years when we retire. And the answer is we have to take the people who are currently on Social Security, promise them their benefits, take the folks who are within a decade or two and say, you've worked your whole life with this as your savings plan. It'll be there for you. And then for folks like myself, we need to transition to a personal savings program so that it's no longer a Ponzi scheme. You're not paying the generation forward. You're taking care of yourself.
Awesome. So next is Jeff Macy.
Yeah, with the social programs and the review of everything, I'm totally in agreement with that. But when it comes to Doge specifically, it's such a new program. I fully support its agenda, but an example of us, like an example where we shouldn't blindly trust what is found within Doge is they wanted to scrap the F-35 last week, which would just completely destroy our military, our power projection, our national security. And it's like everything needs to be considered, but we need to actually review everything. So Doge is new, their processes are new. So I'm a little hesitant on overcommitting at this point on anything related to Doge, but want to protect all
30
of the
seconds.
want to protect all of the services, make sure that they are in place, and that Doge doesn't accidentally make a mistake like scrapping the 35.
Thank you. Jeff Peacock.
Yeah, so in terms of social services at the federal level, it sort of goes back to my answer with the Department of Education. I am a federalist. I believe that we should have government that governs closest to us is government that governs the best. So in terms of cutting social services, basically, I think we should get the federal government out of as many social services as we can and get it moved back to the local level and let local governments and state governments decide that. So in terms of what I would cut, I can't say what I would cut. Some services I would not necessarily cut, but I think that should be made at the local level as opposed to having federal bureaucrats making those types of decisions.
Okay, and then Aaron Dimick.
Yes, I think the ad here right off the bat, I think we need to protect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And there are ways to do that and enter the conversation, Social Security in specific, for being able to increase the pay into time. Rather than cutting people off, we can pay into it longer, increase the cap for it so we can actually pay more into it, and then allow those programs to be self-sustaining by changing it from a general fund, which is where they currently stand, and the government can dig into that for other reasons and actually be able to, something similar maybe to Michael Dillon Thompson's proposition for coming up with an account or a designated line, budget line, that says this is actually dedicated Social Security funding. I think the other bigger, broader question is, I think what's become a part of every social welfare state, and certainly the United States is not immune, are at this point the generations of families that live off the subsistence that government provides through SNAP programs and social welfare.
30
And
seconds.
I think those are the places where we may have to do some painful addressing to say, hey, we have to stop this because we want folks that have the will to work, the will to do good things, and start to draw back on those programs to incentivize people to become more productive in society. So those are the things that I would recommend.
Okay, and then we have, last but not least, Kevin Gaffney.
Yeah, so with my federal experience, I've seen quite a bit, whether it's DOJ or the Veterans Administration, which is one of the biggest bureaucracies, and all of them to a T, grow, grow, grow. And we can just, I'm a 50s baby, 1957. So I do recall the 60s, but in the 60s, we all know how small government was. It wasn't until pretty much the Great Society that all these social programs came about. So I would be specifically, Doge again is an advisory, and they've thrown out some ideas. And one that I didn't like was looking twice at the FDIC. I think we need to keep the FDIC for obvious reasons. So Congress is going to have to be the check and balance on the presidency here and when to say no on certain cutbacks. But there obviously are agencies, the IRS, DOJ needs realignment. So I like the push mainly for realignment, and then, as Speaker Johnson said,
30 seconds.
cutting agencies down to about 200 rather than, and the bureaucracy as well. The bureaucracy is a major part of this. So I would be all for that. Recognizing that almost 49% of the budget is healthcare. So where we cut is going to be, we have to be very sensitive to that.
Thank you all. So the next question will be, how would you balance the demands of government, i.e. fracking or drilling, things of that sort, with the need to protect our natural resources? And Jeff Macy will be first.
We need to go nuclear as quickly as possible. It is the safest, cleanest, most reliable form of power generation. Oil is a national security asset, and we need our own. But we've found that the recent plant that was opened in Georgia, there was a lot of corruption involved, which had a lot of overruns and too much red tape, went on too long. So we need to get off the dependence on foreign oil, but we also need the oil until we can do something like nuclear, which will allow us to have our oil assets for our military and for our key infrastructures. So we have to drill within our own reserves in order to sever the
30
demand,
seconds.
in order to sever the more or less addiction to other countries' oils.
Okay, so Jeff Peacock, you're next.
Sure. So I think there's this common misconception out there among many people that Republicans are not environmentalists. Somehow they don't believe in sustainable technology, for example, or they don't really care that much about the environment. And I think I call it a misconception because it is. I speak personally, and I think I can speak for these other guys as well, that we want to have clean air and clean water just as much as everyone else. But we want to make sure that we do make responsible decisions as well. And I think the problem I have with some of the climate extremists is that they are so extreme on the climate agenda that they get to the point where it doesn't even make sense. Some of their proposals don't even make sense, and it would literally shut down our entire economy. So I think we need to balance both, environmental concerns, making sure that we take care of our environment for future generations to come. But we also need to make sure that we don't so negatively impact our current economy that it makes it a world that no one wants to live in anyway. So I think
30 seconds.
I think we need to take a balanced approach where, yes, we take care of our environment, but we also make sure that we keep our current lifestyle as well. Otherwise, it would be for naught.
Okay, let me get back up here. So then Aaron Dimick.
Yeah, I think this is where, for me, I've been sharing with folks, we need to protect our wildlife and our way of life. And I would continue former Congressman Gates' efforts to protect the Gulf first and foremost. So I don't think that that needs to be reopened. The BP Triumph Fund, we still have funds that are available for the economic recovery, and it's been years since that spill. So we don't want to experience that again. But the things that have already been mentioned, alternative energies, we can get there. We got to energy independence under our former and to-be president in 5 days. So it's been done before. We can open the Alaska pipeline. We can open the West and the East Coast and provide for nuclear power, which Jeff Macy had mentioned before, for sure. And we've made so many advances there. So we can do this without subjecting our Gulf Coast here in Florida District 1 to those elements that could infringe upon our ability to protect our wildlife and way of life.
Nice. Kevin Gaffney?
Yeah, so one of my favorite presidents is Teddy Roosevelt. We all know what Teddy Roosevelt did with laying aside some fantastic areas of our country. So I consider myself, especially in this area of the Panhandle as well. I like the open spaces. I think we need to have more planned growth, not so much aggressive growth, which seems to be based on greed. I am for fossil fuels, so natural gas. I think the government has been, at least the last 4 years, have been forcing even the auto industry into EV, which has been a disaster for them. And it was mentioned earlier today by another candidate, the infrastructure wasn't there in the way of charging stations for EVs. So I'm also for not being fully involved with the Paris climate accords, because we pretty much are nearly reaching our CO2 levels, whereas we
30
know
seconds.
the culprits are India and China, and they're never going to comply. So we could be punished economically for that as well.
Thank you. Michael Thompson?
But we need to invest heavily into non-cyclical energy sources. The problem you have with solar is that, I mean, obviously during the day you have sunlight on these panels, and then at nighttime you have nothing. So the only way to fix that is infrastructure with batteries. And we know that the lithium production is not nearly the check that it was sold us to, and it just damages the entire environment. So they end up not being as green as we expected solar panels to be in the first place. I love the idea of nuclear energy. Right now it's all nuclear fission, where you take it and break it, it makes heat, use it to make energy. Love it. Nuclear fusion is on the horizon in the next 10 to 15 years. We need to be leaders in that, because once you can achieve that, you make energy just like the sun. And then we can talk about that in the future, but that is a huge area of research, and we need to be the #1 country running it. In terms of our natural resources, I agree with a lot of the sentiments said. We have some amazing places in the United States, and those don't need to be sacrificed to achieve energy independence. We saw it could be done as long as you make it a priority, and we can be energy dominant without touching the Gulf Coast or any of our beautiful national parks.
Okay, so our next question is referring more to our Earth. As wildfires, hurricanes, and severe weather increase and impact areas across the nation, what kind of national policy changes do you recommend? If you do not recommend any policy changes, please state your reasons for that position, and we will start with Jeff Peacock.
Sure. So I think, again, this sort of follows on my answer to the previous question. I mean, basically, we need to be making responsible infrastructure investments. For example, along the coast, there are areas that are prone to flooding. So we need to make some responsible investments to try to reduce flooding as much as possible and mitigate the effects of hurricanes, for example. What happened out in California is that, you had some environmental extremists that would not allow the forest to be prepared so that they would not be susceptible to fires like what we're seeing now. And this is the results. And you also see governmental intervention that makes bad mistakes for whatever reason, whatever political reason they choose, made bad mistakes. And then you have firefighters that don't even have water to put out the fires. So I think we need to make responsible decisions and get government and politics out of a lot of these decisions and
30 seconds.
and make decisions based on what's best for the environment and also the people that live in these areas, as opposed to just being driven by politics.
Okay, and so then Aaron Dimick.
My first step would actually be inviting all the governors across the country, all 50, to have a conversation about this. I think we need to set ourselves up for success by understanding and listening to them, what their specific challenges are throughout each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia. because in the absence of that information, like I think we're losing something there if we think Congress, in the absence of that, can come up with something to regulate at the national level. I would not be doing that. And I know that Florida, Governor DeSantis is going to have different priorities and different ways of going about business than Governor Newsom out in California and everyone in between. So that's where I would take that first step to get smart on where their challenges are, where they think they could have help, and then what nationally could be put in place to be able to be a hedge against some of the extremes. For us, it's hurricanes. For them out west, it's fire. Those elements that we could entertain what is best for each of the respective states that could be then governed at the national level, perhaps, and then
30 seconds.
through legislation that could be passed in Congress.
Okay, so Kevin Gaffney?
Yeah, somewhat agree with Aaron on that, in that it's more of a state issue, local issue. And when we look at Florida, the dangers with our multiple huge hurricanes that we've had. So most of the questions, as Michael earlier mentioned, pertain to our insurance crisis. And this did come up today. And I think we need to somehow on the state level better regulate those insurance companies that are coming into the state selling insurance, and then after a major disaster, fleeing and leaving the policyholder with no means to recoup. We also need to revise flood zones, as well as who's bearing the cost, if we're all going to share costs there in regards to the high premiums that are going up consistently for Florida residents. Now in California, as mentioned, there were huge mistakes made by the mayor. I think she's since resigned. The governor, they just did not follow. I think even President Trump offered assistance with
30
brush
seconds.
removal. So if the local leaders aren't going to listen and plan out, then we're going to be in trouble with future events. And I really don't think citizen.org is the answer on the state level either.
Okay, so Michael Thompson.
This ties into the way that we handle infrastructure. Normally, it's with matching grants for large projects where the state puts up a certain amount of money and then the federal government provides the vast majority. These need to be focused on prevention. When you prevent with $1, you save $100 down the road. And we need to make sure that these states are not using the federal government as an insurance policy, because all that does is take taxpayer money and put it back into taking care of subsidizing private people's activities. And I'm not okay with that. For example, we use California because it's happening right now. They made the mistake. They need to promise to the federal government, people are talking about putting conditions on their aid. We got to help people, right? But there need to be conditions that you can't let this happen again, right? In Florida, we are working on building our infrastructure. We are working on making our flood zones safe. And if something were to happen to us, the federal government should say, okay, now your next set of infrastructure money goes towards making you flood resistant, goes towards hurricane improvements. Same thing needs to happen around the country because they experience different types of natural disasters. The taxpayers should be footing the bill.
Okay, so then we have Jeff Macy.
The phrase I would like to use is we need to kind of enforce the local areas to do their best to protect themselves. And like the other candidates have said, like the governor's meeting up to discuss and everything, because there's no one solution that will fit every single natural disaster. Like over where I am right now in Fort Walton, Eglin does control burns, and they did one last week, and that's to help prevent the forest we have over here from just going up in a blaze. During Hurricane Katrina, I actually had to drive into Gulfport, Mississippi, while the hurricane was making landfall to evacuate my grandparents. And that was due to a lack of infrastructure
30 seconds.
to allow people to escape and get out of the way of that, of disasters like that. That's the only thing I can think of that we should have across the board. Wildfires, they need exit strategies, and we just need to keep people safe.
Okay, thank you. Now we have when, if ever, is it appropriate to compromise to pass legislation? And that would go to Kevin Gaffney.
All right, so part of the art of politics, and some of our great leaders showed this, is the art of compromise. But that doesn't mean that we're compromising away our basic principles. So I think the House margin majority for the Republicans right now is 217 to 215. So you're going to have to reach across the line these next 200 days with the ambitious programs that President Trump is proposing. So not to be too critical of Representative Gates, I don't think he was a coalition builder. So we need to have that for our representative in the first district. And we need to do what's best for the first district, not necessarily always focusing on the national hot button issues. So I do believe in compromise. We don't want something like we did in 1850 where we had the Missouri Compromise. So we need to look
30
forward.
seconds.
We need to look forward in our agenda and not be hurting the average middle class Americans, which did come over in the GOP and vote for us.
Okay, so Aaron Dimick.
Yeah, I'll build on what Kevin just offered, because if you don't work with others, they aren't going to work with you. And so we have to be able to have the conversation. And as your representative for the district, I would absolutely fight for what we've prioritized here in the district, and then enter into those dialogues, those conversations with others, because all 435 districts are going to have their priorities, and you have to have conversation, dialogue, debate, and figure out what is that next step that we're going to take that benefits the most across the country. So yes, without a doubt, we have to compromise. And it's just having those conversations with multiple parties and caucuses, committees, to be able to do the good work of government. That's part and parcel of it. And we saw, as Kevin had mentioned, our former congressman, when you don't have those relationships, the district suffers because folks are unable to work with you and for you.
Okay, so Michael Thompson.
I mean, the short answer is compromise is on the table when it benefits the constituents. I mean, my vote is always going to be what's best for Northwest Florida. And if that requires getting consensus for some reason or coalition building, then I get consensus. I build coalitions to benefit Northwest Florida. I'll never compromise my values in order to do so. And I can give you a good example. We need to focus on things when we have the same goal in mind, right? If the goal in mind is making it so that our veterans aren't homeless, we can debate back and forth and compromise on the best way to do that. But a counterexample, if your idea is to put men in women's bathrooms, that is not something where there's a way to meet in the middle. So you have to be beholden to your principles while also compromising where necessary to pass legislation.
So Jeffrey Macy.
Just to avoid repeating what everyone else has said, I'll phrase it a little bit differently, because I do agree. All of this, I grew up around a lot of surgeons. Every surgeon that goes into the OR has a plan and a backup and a backup and a backup and a backup. They have plans A through H. Those can be viewed as compromises from a specific way. So when you are in your negotiations, you go in with a plan, you compromise on yourself, and you might have to switch approaches and go with plan C, plan D, in order to get your intended result. So yeah, in agreement, just trying to provide a little bit different perspective.
Thank you, Jeff Peacock.
Yeah, I've got to figure out a way to say ditto for a minute and a half here. So I will say ditto based on what everyone else said. I completely agree. There are times when you have to compromise. And, in a perfect world, we would have a 50-seat majority in the House, for example, and we could go out and talk about all the things that we're going to force through. And that would be great. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. I mean, we have a 3 or 4 seat majority in the House, and compromise is going to have to be part of the reality of the next congressman that serves in DC for this district. And like all the other fellows said here, know, the priority needs to be the needs of the first district. And, you know, that means finding common ground with folks that you may not agree with on other things. But when you can find things that you agree on, working with them on that, never compromise your principles. But there are going to be, you know, some tactical things, and there's going to be some smaller things that you can compromise for the benefit of the good. So yes, there are going to be times when you need to compromise.
30 seconds.
And again, that's my long ditto to what everybody else has already said.
Okay, so new question, which congressional caucuses do you plan to join in the House and why? We will start with Kevin Gaffney.
All right, there's one that's always appealed to me, and that's the Freedom Caucus. They seem to be the most conservative and the outlier, and they seem to hold the other, let me say, the rhinos, feet to fire in the House at least. And sometimes they don't appear to be overly compromising on the issues, which is a good thing. They did meet with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and it looks like they did reach agreement on some things recently. So I just believe there needs to be a greater conservative voice in the House, and that would be the group I'd like to be aligned with.
And Michael Thompson, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It just makes you say it twice. Yeah, I'd love to join the House Freedom Caucus. I think they are the ones that they're such a big block now, and that they have a lot of leverage in driving policy, and they're not beholden to the establishment, which, I mean, one of my largest goals is to go in and combat these entrenched politicians who refuse to do things responsive to their constituents. That's what frustrates me. There's also a cryptocurrency caucus I would like to be a part of, because I think that's going to be a big driver in the next 10 years as you know, some questions about where the future of currency is headed, and I'd like to be a part of that. And then there's a couple of what is it? The Problem Solvers Caucus, I think, might be a little too, I don't want to say too bipartisan, but I'd be interested in seeing what kind of research they do when they're trying to move things through with bipartisanship.
So Jeff Macy.
Yeah, last night I went through the entire list of the caucuses, and I was quite impressed by how many of them are tech related, like cybersecurity, defense modernization, electromagnetic warfare. There's an internet caucus, STEM caucus, you know, anything that will help with technology. I would be interested in helping advance that so that we have the proper knowledge and understanding. But two that are close to home would be trauma and mental health. Well, trauma and mental health caucuses, because I'm trying to set up a charity for PTSD and trauma sufferers, like military vets, domestic violence, sexual assault victims, and one that hits
30 seconds.
one that hits really close to home, and most people would probably be surprised, is the Venezuelan Democracy Caucus. I have lots of friends and family from Venezuela, and I've watched how that entire country has collapsed ever since Chavez took over. So I just want to help.
Thank you, Jeff Peacock.
Yeah, so I have to tell you that question actually prompted me to do like Jeff Macy did and go and research all the different caucuses that are out there. I never realized how many caucuses there are. So I started going down the list, and there's actually a couple that stood out to me. One was the Congressional Military Families Caucus. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm the son of a veteran. So I'd like to be a part of that because they support, and, you know, it's a caucus of people who are from military families. So I'd be very interested in that. And then my other choice, which I bet none of these other guys would choose, is I'm a car guy. And there is actually a Congressional Automobile and Motorsports Caucus. That just jumped out to me. I'm like, I'm going to get on that one. So those are my two choices.
Okay, and Aaron Dimick.
I'd start off by joining the Border Security Caucus. I had the opportunity for a couple of years to fly missions in Central and South America. and up north in Canada to be able to assist with the counter narcotics efforts, fighting the cartels and trafficking in persons. So I think that caucus is a caucus that I could bring lived experience to. The second one, along with Jeff Macy, is the mental health caucus. I think we have a lot of work to do across the country to be able to help folks that need help and come up with some creative solutions so that we can start to address some of the additional symptoms that our country is suffering from because of folks that have mental health concerns and issues that need to be addressed. And then finally, I would join the Four Country Caucus, which is all veterans, and it's trying to bring civility and integrity into legislation itself, but being able to use, yes, having served in uniform and bringing those characteristics to play in legislation from working in
30
the
seconds.
Veterans and Veterans Affairs arena. So those would be the three for me: the Border Security Caucus, Mental Health Caucus, and Four Country Caucus.
Okay, next question would be, do you support passage of federal voting rights legislation to provide national standards for voter registration and access to the ballot? Why or why not? And we'll start with Michael Thompson.
In general, I'm in favor of having states manage things, but with something so fundamental to democracy, it is the federal government's job to ensure a Republican form of government. I think they need to ensure a set of baselines just to make every single election fair. But at the same time, it needs to be accompanied with perfect, and I mean perfect, transparency, because you cannot give that kind of power to an administration, because we've seen what happens, right? As soon as you have distrust in the electoral process, you have distrust in the establishment or the entire government itself. And we just can't have that. You need people participating, but you also need people to make sure that we don't have dead voters. We don't have unregistered voters. We don't have illegals voting. I'm in favor of ID laws. I think that should be a national policy, and make sure everything stays transparent. That's the asterisk on everything.
Jeff Macy?
I have been spoiled my entire life, having lived in this district, using actually sound, secure processes. So when I hear about other places using like a touch screen voting machine that can be slightly miscalibrated, and then it'll print out the receipt for the vote, to me that just blows my mind, because there's no paper trail. So yes, we need a minimum set of standards for everything regarding that. We don't need to be draconian in the sense that you have to use this manufacturer in this process, but you have to at least have a minimum standard. And like in finance, there's gap principles. In e-commerce, there's PCI compliance. And in medical,
30
HIPAA.
seconds.
So you have these minimum levels of security, and we need to have that regarding the election access and everything.
Aaron Demick?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because first I'd like to take note that the four counties that are in our congressional district of Escambia County, Santa Rosa County, Okaloosa County, and Walton County, they all run elections a little bit differently through the supervisors of elections. So let's just acknowledge the reality first. And I do, even with that, I think there's room for that to continue to exist. But what has already been mentioned a couple of times, I think a national ID is a requirement would be a good thing to have because of all of the things that the federal level provides for us to be able to prove who we are before we get a real ID driver's license. If it's good enough for security to travel in airports, I think that should be a requirement to be able to register to vote and to be able to exercise your vote. So I think there is a conversation here that we have some, to Jeff Macy's point specifically, building on what Michael Dillon Thompson offered, was the minimal national criteria while still giving the local communities the flexibility through their supervisors of election to do what their funding and resourcing allows
30
and
seconds.
what their team is able to actually execute. Because yeah, I think everyone across our district, first congressional district, has been doing a phenomenal job for a long time.
Okay, Kevin Gaffney?
Yeah, I think this relates to the question goes to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And then the amendment or the legislation proposed by John R. Lewis. So the concern with some voters, minority voters, that their rights are being stripped away by recent SCOTUS decisions. And I kind of have a sympathetic ear to that. I understand because of the history post-Civil War, what happened with voting rights all the way up until African Americans were able to get their voting rights in the 60s. So I understand that, but I do believe in minimals. Mainly the ID is a basic requirement. We saw what happened in 2020 with COVID and what happened with the voting, in that signatures were not matched up and those type of things. So I do like with Walton County, at least as was mentioned, Walton County, you have to show an ID, a picture ID. They actually verify your signature in person, and then the voting system is adequate. So I think something minimally federally would work like that.
Okay, so this next question is.
Hey, Beth,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but can I answer that question really quickly?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I skip you?
Yeah, that's okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
Okay. So yeah, in terms of federal voting regulations, I would be comfortable with that for federal elections. As I mentioned earlier, I am a federalist, so I believe in power being held locally rather than at the federal level. I would be a little uncomfortable with the federal government coming in and dictating to local municipalities and, you know, governments basically how they should conduct their state and their local elections. Now, one exception to that would be if you're talking about non-citizens voting, which some municipalities have implemented. I know in Maryland, and I believe California maybe, they've actually had non-citizens voting. I would have even in local elections, I would have a lot of difficulty with that. I would strongly disagree with that. And the one thing that I would say about this is whenever we talk about the federal government coming in and telling people what they can do locally, be very careful about having those types of ideas, because it's great, right? Like right now, we have a Republican president and a Republican Congress.
30 seconds.
And it sounds great when that's the situation, but let's keep in mind that if the roles are reversed and we have a Democrat president and a Democrat Congress, you know, be very wary, because what are they going to do if we set the precedent and then they come in and do the same thing to us? So let's be very careful with that.
Thank you. Next question is, do you support passage of a federal law codifying access to contraception and abortion? Why or why not? And with this question, we're going to start with Jeff Macy.
Yes. In no world will anybody prevent people from having recreational sex. So they need to be able to do so safely. And it also prevents spread of disease worldwide. As for abortion access, the same holds true, because I'm concerned about the mother's health. Due to Obama's economy, I'm in my early 40s. A lot of people my age, a lot of my friends, we haven't been able to have a proper family. So everyone is trying to have kids now, and pregnancy is kind of dangerous. You can have an ectopic pregnancy really easily, and if you're not keeping track of that, it might happen down the road, or
30 seconds.
just from the mother's body kind of failing with the pregnancy. You have to take into consideration the mother's health.
Thank you. And next is Jeffrey Peacock. Jeff Peacock.
Yes, so there's actually two parts of that question I want to address. The first part is contraception. I do not think we need a federal ban on a federal statute codifying access to contraception. I don't think we need that because it's unnecessary. I mean, no one is going to outlaw contraception in this country. I have no belief that there is going to be any outlawing of contraception whatsoever. So I don't think we need to codify it because it's not required. On the abortion question, I do not support legislation codifying abortion access. It's at the state level now since Roe versus Wade was overturned. It's at the state level now, and I don't think the federal government should be coming in and telling states that have voted against abortion that they must now provide abortions just like they did under Roe versus Wade. So I would not support legislation codifying either contraception or abortion.
And then we've got Aaron Demick.
I'm consistent with Jeff. I don't think there's any need for federal legislation for either. And what we continue to have based on voting no to Amendment 4 this past November in Florida, we have the 6 weeks, and that's what we're sticking with. So no, I don't think there's any need, and that's been a conversation that's been going on for a while. Keep it at the state level.
Kevin Gaffney.
So the Dobbs decision gave where it should have been all along since 1973, the Roe decision, back to the states, and that's where it should lie. I think the codification aspect would be just codifying Roe again. So I disagree with that, and I would say no to that. I think the other question on contraceptives, it mainly goes to the RU 486. So I would oppose that as well.
And then we have Michael Thompson. Speaker.
As I just agree with Jeff, Peacock, and Aaron. There's no need for it in the federal government. Easy enough.
Okay, and the next question will be, how would you balance tax cuts and reducing the national debt? Specifically, which one change in the federal policy would eliminate the deficit and reduce the national debt to the greatest extent? And on that one, we're going to start with Jeff Peacock.
So I actually think there's this misnomer out there that in order to increase revenues, you have to increase taxes. And I disagree with that. I actually think there's this concept out there called the Laffer curve, which Kevin, I'm sure you're familiar with as a teacher of economics. The Laffer curve, that basically you find this equilibrium where your revenue reaches its maximum point based on the tax level. And I think that you can reach that maximum point by lowering taxes. So I know it's not conventional wisdom out there in the media and, for a lot of people, but I actually think that reducing taxes would increase revenues. I also think on the expense side, we need to reduce exorbitant government spending, eliminate the waste. That's why I'm very excited about what DOGE is doing. So we can eliminate a lot of government waste. And I think that when their effort is fully underway and the report comes out, we're going to be blown away by just how much government waste.
30 seconds.
So again, I think we can move towards it. The other thing I will say really quickly is that there has to be a commitment to actually balance the budget. I think for so long under both Republican and Democrat administrations that there's been no commitment to balancing the budget. I think without that commitment, we're never going to get there. So the first step is to actually have a commitment to balance the budget.
Aaron Demick.
Building on what Jeff just offered, absolutely. The example from the national debt standpoint, the costs that we're incurring that I've given folks on the campaign trail, both over the summer and this special election, just one example that I experienced firsthand was in the Department of Defense, and it comes from a personnel nature, but pre 9/11, all the secretariat staffs, so for all of the major armed services in the United States, Department of Navy, Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force, all of those, the secretariat staffs were 15 to 20 people average size. When I was there in 14, 15, 16, the average size of those same offices was 300 people. And if it's at that level, that bloat throughout all of the Department of Defense has become overwhelming, and it's grown over the last couple of decades. Believe you me, that is what has happened to every federal department. So I agree with Jeff, the DOGE analysis. I'm hopeful that it shows that. So coming up with the path for those folks to let them know their services are no longer needed, and then be able to cut the budget there. And then agreed, we want to disincentivize people not paying taxes, avoiding taxes. So what Jeff had mentioned as well, to lower the taxes, give a little bit of a tax rate. We want to encourage more people to pay in, have skin in the game for the nation overall. So we're attacking it from both sides and absolutely need to get back to a balanced budget.
Kevin Gaffney.
Right, so for too long, we've been guided by the Keynesian economics, right? So my economic hero is Milton Friedman. So I would, the first task would be to cut spending, and that's going to happen. So we can't do it with the proposal we just had with Mike Johnson with the 1,500 page. The process has got to change in Congress and continuing resolutions. The last balanced budget we had was between President Clinton and Speaker, I'm forgetting his name, Newt Gingrich. So it's been a while, and that's ridiculous. So I do agree with Jeff in that from 82 to 87 during the Reagan years, the tax decreases, he brought that high bracket of 90% down, did increase revenue. So it can work if the tax cuts are implemented properly. But it's always, for me, it's always limited government, less government,
30 seconds.
less taxes. That's one of the appeal of Florida. We don't have a state tax. So the less bureaucracy we have and the less big government we have, the better.
And Michael Dillon Thompson.
Yeah, you just got to take down the administrative state. It is a giant spending machine. That's what it's made to do. It was there to employ people who really didn't have any sort of jobs. We just created a ton of them, or paying people to kind of just sit there. And then you ask, what are we getting from it? There's ways to streamline it down, but you got to go in there with a chopping axe and start cutting down these administrative agencies. That's the only way that you can reduce non-entitlement spending, alongside trying to just find ways like what Doge is doing. And of course, you don't ever want to raise taxes, but if we fix and create a balanced budget, and that is the government's total amount of money in the coin purse, you'll see where the priorities lie, because everything that doesn't have cash being paid to it will be forced to disappear. It's a method of starving the beast. And that's the way that, Reagan wanted to bring down the size of government. It was through tax cuts. You see where the priorities are.
And Jeff Macy.
Even though most of the debt is owned by us US citizens, once the inflation or the interest payments that are coming from the debt start reaching the income level, everything will just completely implode. So we need to make sure that will never happen. So I would focus first on going with some form of balanced budget and make it stick, give it teeth, and then just clean house, top to bottom, which is what I'm hoping Doge is able to accomplish. Yeah, and I'm really concerned about the intersection of the interest payments with the revenue coming in. And I've heard some people mention going back to the gold standard, and that would just be a complete disaster. Japan tried that in the
30
90s.
seconds.
And they tried it in the 90s and it just wrecked their economy.
Thank you. So where are we at? I'm so sorry. That was a national debt. Now we have a new question, which is, what is the most pressing issue related to our current immigration policy, and how should it be addressed? And we'll start with Aaron Demick.
Yeah, the most pressing issue is the security and safety of the United States for folks that are coming across and have come across and are being housed, specifically criminals. And so the deportation plan, I know that continues to be looked at by Tom Hammond as the former ICE commander and now the border czar. Being mindful of both the northern and the southern borders, but we've had the most instances in the southern border, with the southern border, being mindful of that deportation plan and starting with the criminals first. I think there's also an element here where the resourcing of the southern border, I think we have technology, and I know we have technology because I flew it even before, is the wall doesn't necessarily need to be bricks and mortar. We have imagery, we have surveillance, we have drones, we have the fencing. We have ways by which to monitor both above ground and below ground to be able to start prevent. And the interesting thing was we saw toward the end of the year that the Democratic administration
30 seconds.
even saw that and started that because they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they started to change their stance. They started providing additional resourcing and funding. National Guards were mobilized to head down and help the South. So those are the things to get it under control, and we can continue that momentum to bring those down for the continued safety and security of our country.
Kevin Gaffney?
Pretty much aligned with Aaron on this. So closing the borders first, and the legal hurdles are going to be in the courts, obviously, with deportation. So I'm all for hiring the necessary administrative judges that we need to do to adjudicate these cases much faster. So I would prefer they remain in Mexico policy, where they're not in the country awaiting these cases. Also, we need to deal with the issue of national supremacy regarding the sanctuary cities. Now, how are these cities getting away with not allowing federal law enforcement in is just unknown to me, and why that hasn't been tested constitutionally. So those are the three areas. I think getting the criminal element out, and also DOJ needs to set up a task force to fight the cartels, just like we did with organized crime.
Michael Dillon Thompson?
Yeah, I think the hardest issue in this area is the blue states refusing to cooperate with ICE and the federal government. I mentioned this a couple of times. I'm a strict constitutionalist. There are very specific powers granted to the federal government. National security and immigration is one of these, and it is not to be disturbed by the states. The states gave that power away over 200 years ago. And I think the best way to handle that, instead of going into red states and starting the criminal deportation process first, I say you take a hammer out and you start it. You go straight to the blue states. We're saying they're not going to cooperate. You force them to cooperate. If they don't, you turn the spigot off. You can cut their funding in several different ways if they don't cooperate with federal policy.
Jeff Macy?
I agree with everyone regarding the deportation and everything. Another component of this are the legal pathways coming in that are being abused. I've personally sponsored H-1B before, and I've seen a lot of farm, I refer to them as farm companies, where they just bring in people and they kick them around and then they send them out. And what they're doing is we want good people to immigrate legally, but and that's why, like, I think Trump and Musk recommended increasing the H-1B, but we need to get rid of the entities that are leveraging such pathways in a very corrupt manner. And that will also help with the immigration problem that we have, because they
30
use that
seconds.
and they do chain immigrations continuously. And then you just kind of wind up with the issues that everyone else has already addressed.
Jeff Peacock?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what the other fellows were saying. The only thing I would add here is that if we really want to address the illegal immigration issue, we need to cut off the motivation for people to illegally migrate to this country. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that if someone that is in this country illegally goes to an emergency room with an emergency medical condition, we don't treat them. I'm not that heartless. I think we should take care of those folks. But in terms of the social services that people can come over here and get, and all of the different benefits they can come into our country and get, obviously that incentivizes people to cross the border illegally. So in addition to what everybody else was saying, I think we should eliminate the motivations for people to come into the country illegally. And this is something I remember back in 2012, Mitt Romney talked about the self-deportation concept, where basically if you cut off the incentives, they would go back. And I still think that applies. We should do that, and that would probably make the whole deportation process a lot easier.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end. We've got two more questions. Let me see, did I get everyone on that question? Yes, I did. Okay, so next it is, what stance would you advocate to resolve the Israeli-Gaza war? And we'll start with Kevin Gaffney.
So news today, it may be a moot issue. So whether the Biden administration takes credit for it and Secretary Blinken, or Trump gets credit for it, I think Speak softly and carry a big stick by Trump probably wins it out a little bit. But there, I think an estimated 90 hostages still. We don't know really the condition of those hostages. So I always harken back with the Israeli question. They're a major ally of us since May of 1948, and they're probably one of a few. I think Egypt's a little more friendly toward the US, but we don't have a lot of allies in that area. And we've seen the disastrous policies of some of the Bush administrations in the Middle East. So I think it's a good movement toward peace. The Biden administration screwed up with not imposing the sanctions on Iran and giving them all the money to pursue their nuclear capability. So
30 seconds.
I'm optimistic that we are going to have peace there, but there needs to be an Arab country that steps up for the Palestinians in that area. And it may not be Gaza. That may not be the doable area after October 7th.
So, Michael Dillon Thompson.
I think one of the biggest problems with American foreign policy is that the first lever we always pull is military, whether advancing our own troops or supporting an alternative military. The very first thing we ever try, and the last one we should ever try, we need to focus on diplomacy. And we should have been doing a better job at this administration negotiating a peace deal and forcing the sides through economic means if we need to, into complying with a peace deal. We can't support terrorism, and we can't let allies just get eaten alive by terrorists. But at the same time, we can't be sending aid packages to one side and arms to the other side and pretending like we're not causing the damage. We need to stop with a world globalist policy with our foreign policy and really make it American first. It needs to advance American interests every time we intervene, or we never should intervene.
Jeff Macy.
We seem to operate as like a global police at times, but we also have an addiction to forever wars. And I want to be able to end forever wars. And when I look at the Israel situation, no matter how much I read into it, it just does not make sense to me. So I just have to, this is one of those where I would have to rely on experts who actually know the intricacies of the cultural details within that area and take their advice.
Jeff Peacock.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Michael was saying, is that so many times we seem to just, our knee-jerk reaction is war. You know, let's go to war about something. Well, actually, let's try diplomacy. You know, if we can, there's this saying that war is the final step when diplomacy has failed. And unfortunately, we jump to that final step far too many times. And I think if we focus on diplomacy first, and this goes for the Middle East as well. Now, I do think that we need to understand that our strongest ally in the Middle East is Israel. So I think we should have a strong favoritism towards Israel. But I really do believe, and I think during President Trump's first term, he was very successful at this, bringing both the Israelis and many of the more moderate, well, I guess moderate, it depends on your definition, but some of the more receptive Middle East countries to the table. And I think with President Trump coming back into office, I have hopes that he can continue those diplomatic relationships that he built during his first term.
Aaron Dimick.
Having operated, flown missions over in the Middle East post 9/11, the two adds that I will offer to what has already been said, the United States did ourselves a disservice for balking for a few days for resourcing Israel. And that's what happened in the wake of October 7th. And so we should never do that again. The support from the United States to the only democratic entity in the Middle East should never be questioned. And that's resourcing, at least initially up front, and then being able to seek diplomacy and then go with the military if needed. So that's one. The other is, from a diplomacy standpoint, being able to leverage the Saudi Arabian delegates that have helped over the last couple of years. That has been something that has been encouraging in that space. because we should never balk in support of Israel. And it looks like there's a bit of a complexion change in the Middle East for those who have come to aid, to the negotiation table, trying to help out our Secretary of State to figure those things out, because they know, and we've seen the collapse of Syria now in the wake of this time frame as well, and then being able to still counter and be a viable counter to Iran in the area. Those are all good things, but I don't want people to forget those first few days around the October 7th, we balked at it, and we should never do that again. We need to support Israel.
So our next question is, do you favor continuing to support Ukraine in the war with Russia? Why or why not? And we will start with Jeff Peacock.
Yeah, so when you say support, I certainly think that we have a more acceptable winner in that war. I think we should be on Ukraine's side. I would certainly prefer for Ukraine to win this war as opposed to Russia. That being said, when you talk about support, I have a very limited thought of what that support should be, because again, what is our national interest? We really have to be clear before we get involved in these foreign interventions. What is our national interest? And when you look at the Ukrainian-Russian war, what is our national interest? Now, obviously, like I say, I think it would be good if Ukraine wins and Russia did not win. But beyond that, just hoping that Ukraine wins, what is our national interest? I'm not sure what that is. And given that, I don't think we should be investing billions and billions of dollars, our blood and treasure, into a war that I really can't define what our national interest is. And it really concerns me when you look at the escalation based upon the Biden administration of providing more and more weapon systems to Ukraine to basically fire into Russian territory. I mean, I still remember growing up when we had air raid drills to prepare for a nuclear war. We need to remember that Russia is a nuclear power, and I do not want to get into a nuclear war with Russia simply because of this Ukrainian support. I think we need to be very careful with how involved we get with this.
Aaron Dimick.
So it's interesting here. I think what we saw in the wake of the election results in November, a couple of days later, Putin was intimidated and brought North Korean foot soldiers in to start fighting in that area. So for those that weren't paying attention, potentially, like the influence that our incoming president has already preceded him coming into office. I don't think that we need to be involved in Ukraine anymore. I think he will make good on his promise with congressional authorization to continue to do what needs to be done in order to push Putin back. And this is the ad that I will make here. Also, having operated in that part of the world, we need to be mindful of the fact that the part of U.S. interest, so I may differ just a little bit from Jeff Peacock here. Ask the Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Polish, Bulgarians, Romanians. Their fear is Putin is going to come into them. And this is not made up. This is not fiction. This is fact. So when he makes that overstep into Ukraine to try to flex some power, then we need to be present in those Eastern Bloc nations to let him know you need to go back in your box. The lessons that we learned very painfully and very quickly up front is that the resourcing we did provide went to the wrong folks. So we got that under wraps. We got those lessons learned. And then the people that needed, the armies and Zelensky, that needed President Zelensky, that needed those resources, they got to where they needed to be. And then we started seeing progress the other direction. So I think we are waning down from this. And I think the Trump administration is going to handle this probably within the next few months and be out.
Kevin Gaffney.
And so the old KGB Putin, he hasn't changed his colors at all. He's a dictator, pretty much self-anointed. There's not really any form of democracy after the wall came down. So you look at World War II and the similarities with the Axis powers. You've got North Korea, you've got China, and you've got Russia. And I would treat Russia equally as our adversary, China. So since February of 2022, 183 billion. What's NATO put in comparison? So the US has put a lot of money in, and we have not looked at America first. I'm sympathetic toward the Ukrainians, but I also recognize the old Soviet states, the satellite states that were there, and the call by the Russian leadership. I'm not sure the populace there that are fully in support of Putin. I think if we put economic pressure on Putin, he could be toppled, but there doesn't seem to be an emphasis there.
30 seconds.
I do believe that negotiation with strength, and Trump is very good at this, to get Putin to the table and Yeltsin and find out how we can resolve this, whether it's part of Ukraine being ceded away, the old territories of the Russian territories. So that might be the solution that they end up with.
Michael Dillon Thompson.
The playbook's got to be the same. It's got to be a question of what is the American interest. And I know the idea is that if they get through the Ukraine, they hit NATO territories, they end up with interfering with allies, and we're dragged into a war. First of all, we need to make NATO either pay their fair share or pull ourselves out of it. Right now, it's just a giant charity fund funded by the United States. But second, we need to go back to the drawing board on what levers we're going to pull. We went military first. We started sending military arms to Ukraine. Okay. We go to the table. We need to talk about economic sanction options, and we need to talk about diplomacy, because wherever this boundary gets drawn is irrelevant to the United States as long as we can push them out of a war. If we have a war that's, we're fighting an ally now again with a nuclear power, then what are we defending in terms of American interests? We're never sending troops that way. If we're going to keep funding the military industrial complex by sending weapons to both sides, we need to do diplomacy through economic force and make them end this war, which I think very strongly is what's going to happen in the next couple months.
So Jeff Macy.
During Trump's first term, I was in charge of a lot of the data with the FDA, and our main adversary was Russia that we had to protect. After the FDA, I was working for a company as head of engineering, and most of our employees were in Ukraine when the war broke out. So I was speaking with a lot of them daily as the war was progressing. A lot of them were in Sumy and Kherson, and I helped get more than a handful of people out of the Russian occupied territories through Zaporizhia. What I've found from hearing them, us sending cash really does not do anything. Us sending weapons is what helps. And from our side, as an engineer, I love, like, we have to test anything we build in a real life situation. So I'm seeing this as a real life test situation of our outdated equipment that we need to replace anyway.
Okay, well, that is it for the questions. We'll now have 3 minutes of comments from everyone, closing statements from each candidate, and we will start with Aaron Dimick.
I'm sorry, how many minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yes.
Fantastic. So this is concluding comments, Beth? It cut out there for a little bit.
Closing statements, including everything.
Fantastic.
So thanks. Your 3-minute elevator speech.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Beth, for extending the invitation for us to join you this evening. Thanks, Mary, for being our timekeeper, and Blake for doing everything with Facebook. And it's just been a pleasure to be able to chat with you all and answer these questions. They're really good, substantive questions. And I hope that you all got the information from each of us that you were hoping would aid your decision. So for me, I'm a political outsider and statesman that will listen to everyone. And I mean everyone, not just the power brokers in our district, not just the wealthy in our district, everyone, because that's who I aim to represent. And for me personally, I executed and exercised courage while in uniform for over 20 years. I exercised courage when I ran against our former congressman this past summer into the August 20th primary. And as I mentioned before, 26,788 of you provided me with your highest endorsement, which is your vote. And several of you joining this evening may have been a part of that, and I thank you. And you better believe I will exercise that same amount of courage as your representative from our 1st district up in Washington, D.C., for all the things and questions we've talked about so far and many more. So I'm excited about the road forward to have this opportunity to represent the district, hopefully bring a breath of fresh air, someone that can speak intelligently to what our priorities are, represent you well, collaborate with others in the House of Representatives to continue to push President Trump's America First agenda with the majority in Congress. So thank you all very much for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful and happy new year. And I look forward to continuing to chat with you and earn your vote. I would appreciate your support. Vote Aaron Dimmick on January 28th. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. And Kevin Gaffney?
So I thank the League of Women Voters for this forum. This has been a great night and a great day. And I just want to quote one of my favorite presidents. And one of the biggest issues, I think, is the debt that's being inherited by this generation. The simple truth is, no matter how hard you work, no matter how strong this economy grows, no matter how much more tax money comes to Washington, it won't amount to a hill of beans if government can't curb its endless appetite to spend. So I will always be, I'm going to assure the voters of the first district, a social and fiscal conservative, whatever the personal cost, putting forth the best interest of my constituents. Isn't that the essence of true humble servanthood? And I think the men up here, at least present tonight, I'm not speaking for the others, are true humble servants. And they are in the arena, like Teddy Roosevelt talked about, being in the arena and not just the critic on the sideline. So I do pray for them. And I'm not supported, as we mentioned today, by any big PAC groups. I limited my contributions to $500. I had a $10 contribution from Colorado today. I cherish those $10 contributions. So we know who the leader is, and we have to hold him accountable. And Jimmy, who's not here. So one of my favorite basketball coaches, UCLA coach John Wooden, and I coached basketball over at Rocky, assistant coach. And he had that pyramid of life, right? Pyramid of values. And that's what we need to remember with our youth and what we're doing in Congress as a congressman. So I'm just a common man who is true to his beliefs. And that's the way I live. I'm a Christ follower. I put God first in all I do, my wife second, and my family, and then everything else. So that's the priorities I have in my life. And one thing about dark horses, we may all be dark horses here, right, in this race, but Lincoln was a dark horse in 1860 in Chicago. And he came through, the rail splitter from Illinois, the circuit rider lawyer. So don't be discouraged, voters. You've got 10 quality candidates. You're going to have to be very discerning in this race. And I pray for your vote, your support, and I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much. So Michael Dillon Thompson, you're next.
I think it's important to understand what's at stake in this race. This isn't just a special election hosted by the state of Florida to shoehorn in their favorite person. This is a chance for the voters of Northwest Florida to pick one person to go up to DC and fight for their best interests. We've got local, homegrown folks who are fighting for your vote, and they need to be able to take your voice to Washington to focus on the issues important to Northwest Florida. Bigger than that, we have to think about following elections. We have midterms in 2 years, and we almost always lose the House of Representatives. I'm promising you that if you elect me into the House, we are bringing in an entire new block of young voters who will be able to flip elections in districts across the entire country. The issues important to me locally are fighting the homeowners insurance crisis, making sure veterans can access their benefits, bringing education local, cutting regulations so that businesses can breathe, and fixing our infrastructure to make us more hurricane-proof. These are all things that are based in common sense politics. There's no way to justify these crazy left extremists anymore. And it's time for a new generation of conservative leadership. I would absolutely love your vote on January 28th. My name is Michael Dillon Thompson, and thank you so much for having this forum with us tonight.
Thank you. And Jeff Macy.
I also thoroughly agree. I just had a brain fart. Thoroughly enjoyed this forum. So a lot of people don't know who I am, and a lot of that's intentional. But I thought a nice little joke would start it off, like Teddy Roosevelt would say, "Speak softly, carry a big stick." So I'm obviously an unknown, and since I don't do any ads, and what's another name for big stick? It's a mace. and that's who I am. And my middle name is Theodore. So it's just always been kind of funny. The problem I have is there's a lot of knowledge I'm able to work with, a lot of specialties where I'm able to help people with. I'm not just cybersecurity, not just software. I do feel that that is the premier concern for the country going forward, especially over the next 5-10 years. We need to get in the right direction. So regardless of who is elected, I'm helping that person with a cybersecurity directive as full force as possible to make sure that these concerns are addressed. And means I don't have to be elected in order to provide that help.
Thank you, Jeff Peacock.
Well, I just want to, Beth and Mary and Blake, I just want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to speak with you tonight. And, you know, I want to say that the fellows that showed up here tonight, I mean, I want to congratulate them. I want to recognize them for being willing to show up. We've been doing a lot of these forums over the last few weeks, and I fear that a lot of us can probably recite the opening and closing statements for each one of us. But I do want to commend them for showing up, because they did show up. And that is so important in politics, because if someone won't show up for something like this, then when they're elected, they're probably not going to show up then either. So I want to commend them for being willing to show up like this. As I mentioned earlier, I am not a career politician. I'm a teacher. I'm just a regular guy, and I want to go out and I want to represent all those people who have been unrepresented for so long. And you know, people will say, well, you know, why are you running? Well, that's why I'm running, because I want to make sure that those folks have a voice in our government. And, you know, they'll say, well, you know, there's this other guy from over in Panama City, and he's got all the money and he's got all the big endorsements. How are you going to beat that guy? Well, you know what? I call me old-fashioned, but I believe that money and power should not be a prerequisite for running for public office. And that's the great thing about America. Someone like me, who doesn't necessarily have the biggest war chest or who doesn't have all the big contacts, can go out here and run for office to represent my fellow citizens here in the 1st District of Florida and give back to the community that's given so much to me. The other thing that's great about America is that folks like you don't have to be told what to do. You can make your own decision. No one can tell you who to vote for. You get to evaluate the candidates and make your own decision. And those are the things that I think make America great. Now, again, if you're looking for the guy that's got the biggest war chest, or the guy that's got the biggest campaign staff, or the most contacts out there, I'm not your guy. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to work for you tirelessly day in and day out and work for you, not the special interests, then I submit I am your candidate. And on January 28th, I hope you'll vote for Jeff Peacock. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit my website. It's jeffpeacock.com. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you to all the candidates for participating and showing up tonight in this forum. We appreciate your time and effort in being a candidate. This forum was recorded and can be viewed on the Florida League of Women's website at lwvfl.org. The villages, whoops, that's not right. Tri-County website, which that would be Okaloosa County, League of Okaloosa Walton County website. Within the next 24 hours, it was broadcast on League of Women Voters Facebook page tonight and can be viewed there immediately. To our audience, please tell your friends, family, and colleagues that they still have a chance to learn about the candidates by watching the recorded forum. We remind everyone to check out our league's online voter guide at vote411.org. Thank you for being an informed voter. Remember to vote in the January 28th primary elections. Recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the league. The league will only allow audio video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I would
Okay.
like to say something. I would like to thank all you gentlemen for putting yourself out there as candidates. You're the ones that help us make democracy work. So thank you. I'm not one of you. That's why I'm sitting here in my living room. So thank you for putting yourselves out there. I personally appreciate it.
Same for me. I appreciate all of your running. It's hard work, and I appreciate especially all of you showing up. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me for any of this information to put on your sites. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Beth.
you.
Thank you, Mary.
Have a great night.
Night.
Good night.